Great. It's nice to have you all here. I recognize a few names. I am excited. I know we have SLPs. We often have OTs and other AT specialists. I know we have a parent on today, I recognize. Um, Sarah's put the link to our notes in the chat. And I will just start with a quick overview of how this works in case you haven't joined us before. So, my name is Sarah Kinsella. I am a speech language pathologist and assistive technology specialist for the Special Education Technology Center. And I'm joined by Sarah Ayers. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Sarah Ayers, and I have the exact same credentials. I am a speech language pathologist and assistive technology specialist working for a Special Ed Tech Center.
Thanks for joining us. And we have Joyful helping us with all the behind the scenes things. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. The goal of today, the goal of all of these AAC collaboration corners is just that, to come together, to collaborate, to ask those burning questions if you need, just to make it a little bit less like you're on an island, if that's where you're at, or just to learn. Some people are just here to listen and learn. Some people have things they want to share. So we hope to learn together as a group, collaboratively. Our notes are in the chat again, and they're laid out so that you can have a table of contents. If you want to look and see what we've talked about in the past, you can click on that day and it'll take you right to it. We have recordings on our YouTube channel for all of these, except last time we talked about funding. I haven't finished editing and putting that one up there yet. So that'll come soon. It's on my list. But today is January 9th, and we're talking about integrating AAC in inclusive classrooms. And I'll just put a shout out because if you happen to see our social media posts for this week, our tip was about that. And Sarah had a great tip about what they're doing in Bellevue. So check it out if you haven't seen it. Maybe I'll put a link to it while Sarah's going through the presentation. So are there any questions in the chat I need to know about?
Let's look. How do we find your social media?
Oh, there you go. So that's a great question. I will put all of that in the notes, but we're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and I will put all of that in these notes up here at the top where we have our YouTube link. This is the playlist for this specific webinar series. We also have other things in that YouTube account, but thanks. I will add it there. So today, I should have gone the easy way. Today, Sarah has a resource to share, and she's going to walk us through some ideas, and then there's guiding questions within this document. So we'll have time to pause and share as a group and talk.
So this is based off of a presentation that I gave in my district earlier. I think I gave it last year, updated it a little bit. But what you'll see here is different buckets of resources and topics that you can think about within the idea of AAC in the inclusive classroom. And then within each bucket are some questions. Since not a lot of questions came out yet, I kind of wanted to get the group thinking and talking and collaborating around some of these ideas. So we'll start with posing questions within each of these buckets of information, and then go into some resources that you can use as well. So just thinking about in general, setting the framework for inclusion in AAC, many of us here already know this, but we know that the inclusive classroom may be the best option for AAC users. And there's a lot of data and evidence to show this. This slide comes from the TIE Center that's linked here, so you can check out that website for more information and resources. But some of what these rectangles here say, that increased opportunities for learning and displaying competence in communication. Those increased opportunities happen in the inclusive classroom as opposed to a self-contained type of classroom. Development of literacy skills to enhance language development. Opportunities for social engagement with competent communication partners. Increased opportunities for building social relationships and increased motivation to communicate with same age peers. So these are just a few of the benefits to students with who use AAC to communicate. But there's a lot of research that shows that benefits go both ways, right? So that inclusion is helpful for students who use AAC or who are being included in their general education, as well as the typically developing peers. So these are some of the categories that we can talk about today, and I'm not sure if we'll get to all of them. So feel free to come back to these slides and look up some more resources if we don't get to all of it today. The first bucket is authentic peer interaction. And we'll talk a little bit about what does it mean to be authentic versus just being a peer. AAC as a tier 1 support, and that's where we can showcase our social media post and what we talked about in that. Instructing all communication modalities, making curriculum accessible, setting up the AAC user for success, and then training staff is a big one, but we won't get to that one today because we talked about that in November. And so linked here are our November notes, which will just take you back to the shared AAC collaboration corner notes. So if you are interested in doing some of that staff training or reminding yourself what we talked about in November, feel free to go back to those notes. Okay, so thinking about AAC in the inclusive classroom, authentic peer interaction, I really believe is key. And so I just wanted to get us thinking and talking as a group here. How might you avoid putting peers in the role of helper and instead support genuine friendships? When we're thinking about including our students who use AAC in the inclusive classroom, we really want our peers to be genuine friends instead of just helpers. So what are some ideas of how you might do that? At the secondary level too, I think a lot even more about the leveraging those high interest activities. So, maybe someone's really into Minecraft. I don't know what kids these days are into the secondary level, but creating some kind of club or group where someone, more different people who communicate in different ways could all join, whether they're considered typically developing or have a particular diagnosis or use AAC or don't. And they're connecting around something that's authentically interesting and motivating to them to communicate about.
That's a fun idea. I'd also love to hear from anyone who has implemented iPad use for peers and how do you approach that with your district? We talked about funding last time, and I know it can be tricky, but how did you make that a model in your district? That would be interesting to hear about. There's a comment, I recently created a lesson surrounding Pokemon cards. Great idea. That's a hot topic for sure. A long-lasting hot topic. Another comment, we have a lending library in Illinois and have used devices that way, but we're working on getting ones that we own. So within your district that you would have. And someone said it's easier to do if your district already has 1-1 iPads for every student. And then you've pushed apps, the AAC app to that iPad. Sarah, that's what you did in Bellevue?
Yeah, we've done that. We're starting to do that through our pilot with Proloquo. But something we've done in the past too is take some of those older iPads that are still working, but that we might not be giving to a student because they're not, the latest and greatest or whatever, and use those old iPads if they can still run an AAC app. Have those be like the modeling or buddy or partner AAC iPads.
Good idea. Someone said, I'm not an SLP, and that's all right. But one way to increase authentic friendship is to teach students that everyone communicates differently. There's not one way to communicate. Definitely. And I'm glad you're on here and not an SLP because we all can help with communication and friendship. There's a question about how to manage the license, Sarah. How are you managing licenses?
Okay. So we have multiple licenses that we own for our AAC app that we use as our tier 1, tier 2 app. And so we have enough licenses to provide some for buddies or other students as well.
Great. And then someone's just commenting, it'd be great to have it through the district. Sometimes students bring it home and then forget to bring it back.
Yeah. But the comment earlier about teaching everyone to that there are different ways to communicate is actually a nice segue to these resources here. This second bullet is what I have called before an AAC classroom circle of friends or a lesson where you can either teach, and I've done it with like kindergarten through third. So usually like the earlier elementary classrooms, you can teach all the students what is either assistive technology and pointing out, glasses are AT, a smartwatch could be AT, all of these things, or more focused on AAC. And so I put in here, this should be available to be viewed by everybody, but it's an example lesson for a kindergarten through third grade class using a book. And so it's just exactly what was mentioned in the comments. It's teaching the whole class. So this would be for a general education kindergarten through third grade class. What is communication and what are all the different ways that someone might communicate? So there's different still photos of people, laughing together or using their body to communicate and twirl. And the students talk about how all of these different ways are communication. And it eventually leads to a picture of an AAC board, a communication core board, and how some students use that to communicate. And then at the end of the lesson, towards the end, we read a book about AAC and communication and a picture book, and then end with bringing in some devices or core boards and having all the students chat with each other using AAC. So that's in there for you all to look at and use if you would like. Some other resources on here. This is a blog post. I believe it came originally from Practical AAC, and it is by Sarah Gregory, who's an AT specialist out on the East Coast. And she talks about how she integrates AAC into the inclusive classroom in project-based learning. And it's just a really cool blog. So I recommend checking that out. And then this article here is another one from Ties, and it talks a lot about creating peer support networks. And there's a lot of evidence-based research in there on how to do that and how you might create different high interest groups for an elementary level student and a secondary level student. So just some resources for you all to check out around the topic of authentic peer interaction.
Those are great resources. I want to know if anyone else has done a circle of friends type idea and how that's worked. But I just wanted to circle back in the chat. There's a comment that most current research is showing that AAC can help with receptive language and other skills for verbally speaking students as well. So providing AAC apps to other students in class can be done as a UDL support for learning in all students. And so this ends up serving as a peer model. Yeah.
I love that. And that is a perfect segue to bucket number 2, which is exactly that, using AAC as a tier 1 support.
Can we, there was couple more comments before
Oh yeah,
we jump
absolutely.
in. Sorry, Sarah.
That's okay.
There's a question, what AAC app do you use for all the students to chat with each other? I feel like a lot of them would be fairly complicated for that setting.
I've done it different ways. So in the district that I've supported in Bellevue, for their tier 1 tool, which we'll get to, it has historically been Proloquo to Go. And so that's the app that we have the most licenses of. And at the tier 1 level, we have printed their static core board page that is the 7x11 grid for Proloquo to Go. And so we'll either bring in those paper-based boards and, just model first how you might say like, how are you, and touch you, and you could use words if you want, or you could use just the words on the board if you want. Or if we're looking at a robust AAC app, then maybe we have an adult with each group of students. So we might divide up into say like 3 different groups with an adult with each group. And then the adult could navigate to feelings, let's say, and just, the kids actually end up taking the device and just running with it. Even these little bitty preschoolers or kindergartners, they would surprise you on how quickly they're poking around and finding things in there.
That's true. The technology comes quickly for younger kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Quickly than it does for us. I want to make sure I've covered the questions in the chat. Is there anything I'm missing? There was a question, if you use it for UDL support, do the other students that do not need AAC use the same app? I think you kind of touched on that, Sarah, like with the idea of like could be low tech core boards but if anyone has any other comments on that. There is one more comment. Primarily, yes, they'll use the same app unless the student comes in with another one already or needs another one for a specific reason, like language is available, like if they speak in a different language. Leslie's saying we use grid, supercore 50 vocabulary primarily. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing.
Thanks, Leslie. So I think when you're thinking about AAC as a UDL support, as a tier one support, yes, it would probably be all the same app or a similar looking app. But in my mind, when you think about then, oh, I have this student or these several students who use a different app, is that still okay? Yes, of course it is. We always want to think about what does this individual need when it's someone who does need AAC and it's written in their IEP, and it's something they need to support them through SDI, then yes, you're giving them what they need. But for as a UDL support, it's a lot easier for classroom teachers if they are getting to know one system. And that's one of the benefits to using AAC as a tier one support is that the teacher is then hopefully using it and modeling it more frequently. And so they are more comfortable with finding where the words and things are.
I guess that whole conversation leads right into your next section, Sarah. So I think you can go ahead.
Yeah, so the question I wanted to pose to the group here is what types of visual supports or AAC and or, because you can think of AAC as a visual support as well, have you used or observed in classrooms and how can they be leveraged as universal tools? We're kind of already talking about this using AAC as a tier one tool.
And maybe if you're not currently doing this or you haven't seen this, as a tier one support, what are you thinking about? What are you considering? A comment that I'm thinking about how to gain teacher buy-in. Yeah, that's a great point. And if anybody wants to share how they've done that, we'd love to hear. Another comment that core words are also sight words, and many of our early elementary kids are learning. I've just talked about that in a training yesterday. I think that's a good point. That definitely helps with teacher buy-in too, right? Because they're like, oh, these are the words we're already talking about, and they're right here on this system.
Yep, absolutely.
A comment we don't have as a current tier one support, but considering training for admin first and then staff and students and getting buy-in. Interesting. And then there's another comment, visual schedules that have tactile or high contrast symbols for students with visual impairments. Yeah, thank you for thinking about that. That's important to think about all the different and if you want to add any resources that you've used for that, I know people are always loving resources for different things. So another comment, one thing we do is have the teacher put up the app on our interactive panels during instruction. It helps with teacher buy-in for me to explain then that they don't need to worry about going around and modeling on each individual student device, but can show for all students at once. Yeah, so for instance, yesterday in the training, we were talking about chat editor and how you could, from your computer, display that on a smart board or interactive board in your classroom. And I think that's what you're saying, something like that. And I guess you guys do that with the super core. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think Grid makes it easier in a way because you can run it out of your PC, and so it's pretty straightforward to have the grid up and then also have some sort of curriculum or PowerPoint or other thing running at the same time. But going back to the question of teacher buy-in, and that's something I'm thinking about all the time because I could train SLPs till I'm blue in the face. And yes, it's great for an SLP to come and maybe co-teach and lead a lesson. But until I get that teacher buy-in, it's not really going to happen consistently. And so just a couple quick words of wisdom on that topic. I would say one is being able to show the teacher what's in it for them. So that might be, showing them how they can use it, to Leslie's earlier point, as a receptive tool. So instead of using your words to say these instructions over and over and over again, let's try and model it on the AAC. And then maybe you have it up on the big board, the smart board, and it's staying there. So it's a visual representation. So you can just point to it instead of having to say the direction verbally so many times over and over. So maybe that's one example, showing the teacher what's in it for them. I also think another thing I've learned over the years is it's okay to start small. So if you have one teacher who's like a go-getter and willing to try this with you, and maybe you're friends and you're like, hey, just like help me out here a little bit. Get that one teacher doing it. They start to see positive momentum and success, and then they start telling people about it. And then it kind of snowballs from there. So if I could think of two pieces of advice, it's show them what's in it for them, and then go with the goers.
I love that, Sarah. I'm saying that. Go with the goers. Be like trademark Sarah Ayers.
Yeah.
And I worked with a teacher who she already had the buy-in. She was excited about it. She was thinking about paraeducator buy-in, knowing that her paras are working with the students all the time and they were fantastic. She was so excited, but they were nervous about starting to use this was using pod books for in this example. And she just said, you know what, guys, this is going to be so messy when I start doing this, but give me grace. And here I go. And I'm going to try doing it. And of course, you mess up when you're modeling it and using it. And it really did let them say, okay, we can do this. You know, we don't have to be perfect.
Yeah. I love that. It just opens a door for people to like respond by showing their vulnerability as well. When you see someone else modeling vulnerability, it makes you automatically feel, or I'd say it makes me feel more comfortable and willing to be vulnerable as well.
That's why I mess up all the time, Sarah, just so you know. I'd be curious to hear how folks are getting administrative buy-in. One thing I've seen recently in several meetings I've had with school teams is when the administrator is part of the training we're doing around AAC, they are often in these meetings that I've had recently, they've often been like the goer, and they're looking upside, I didn't know yesterday I was doing a training and I didn't know if the administrator was fully part of, listening to what we were talking about. I knew she was there and interested, but she was kind of looking to the side a lot. And at the end, she was like, okay, I was researching and I found that you can get low tech boards and we can have these available for all the kids. And I was like, oh my gosh, how exciting. And I have seen that if you're inviting people to be part of your training or your meetings, and then they're hearing the successes and the challenges and all of that. But if anybody else has ideas, would love to hear. In the chat, example of a custom grid set I created for teachers to use their panels. It has examples of the preschool teacher's daily slide deck pulled. I'm gonna have to make my chat bigger. Here we go. The preschool teacher's daily slide deck pulled into grid with the first page of core words from SuperCore 50 vocabulary on the side. Links at the top are for the other curriculum teachers use in our district. And she put this an example in the chat, which I'll stick in our notes. Thank you for sharing that, Leslie. I love that because it's got your curriculum and it's got words to talk about it. And I know that Alicia probably could touch on this too, that there's Grid for Schools, which kind of is set up to do the same thing as well, which is pretty neat.
One other thought I had before we move on about going back to the idea of buy-in for admin are also they get FOMO, fear of missing out too. So if you tell them, hey, in neighborhood district to our right over here, they are doing XYZ and getting funding for it, and they've had so much success, and these are the outcomes they're seeing, and this is how it's pushing and moving their needle forward, then admin might listen to that as well.
Great point.
So thinking about AAC as a tier 1 support, here are some reasons why it is helpful, authentic inclusion. While you're using it, you're training communication partners to then use a student's individual AAC system with them. It helps to increase social advocacy. So for example, as students learn to use more AAC and they feel more comfortable with it because they're using it in their day-to-day life at school, if you have a sub teacher and the student who needs the AAC to communicate doesn't have access to it in that moment, then maybe their peer will be more likely to say, oh, our friend over there needs a device that's charging on the wall, and advocate for them. Also, inclusion is not just about one student. And this is what we've been talking about. We can consider using AAC as a UDL tool. So here are 2 different resources. This is a core boards for all YouTube video, is just explaining the idea of using AAC as a UDL tool. And then here's another blog about how I think this is also from Sarah Gregory, how to use AAC in Gen Ed. by incorporating peer modeling. And I believe this is the article where she talks about small group time and having a group of students who are all using the AAC together. And the quote says, by teaching all students to use AAC and strategically using it as part of academic lessons, we observed an increase in the social inclusion of students using AAC. And then another resource we'll add in later is our social media, the link to the video that we posted this week as well. Okay, so moving on to our next bucket of information here. This one is instructing all communication modalities. And so the first question I kind of wanted us to think about was, how might you leverage the support and interest from one teacher to motivate others in your building? Kind of talked about it a little bit. Or if you wanted to answer the next question, that one is, in your opinion, what might be the most powerful way to get initial buy-in from a teacher? So we kind of talked about these a little bit already, but if you have any other ideas, let us know. And just to clarify too, what I mean by instructing in all communication modalities is that it's that idea of modeling. So when teachers are instructing in verbal, spoken language, how do we get them to also model on a big core board or on an embedded grid display on a smart board or whatever it might be?
I think sometimes we just need to realize that it takes time, right? This can take time, and also celebrate the successes that you have. If you have a teacher who is modeling maybe with other students' systems, highlight that for them, and then you could talk about next steps, but also just think about what are those successes that you are seeing. Because I know we get excited about wanting more.
As people are thinking about those questions, I'll show you some of the resources we have on this topic. If you haven't seen them already, AAC implementation strategies are described and defined and offered in a whole package professional development training or series of trainings that's called Model as a Master Pal. And so this link takes you out to that. And it's something where you might not necessarily have the capacity to train, you know, in a very formal sit down way, but maybe you pull a resource or two from here because it's just a very beautiful collection of resources on how to train in all of these different strategies. And so you could share some of those with the teachers and educators you're supporting. Another resource here is on descriptive teaching. And so this talks about what is descriptive teaching. And then this video here is a science teacher at the secondary level explaining, I believe she was teaching topography and maps. And so she's talking about, they use LAMP Words for Life as their AAC app in the district. So she talks about using descriptive teaching to teach some of these higher level academic vocabulary words, which also in teaching the student who uses AAC, it also teaches all the other students what the words mean and to further understand them. And for me personally, descriptive teaching has been a really big light bulb moment for teachers when I show them how they can use words that seem really simple and put them together in ways to explain, define, describe their academic vocabulary words that they're targeting. Then I start to see those light bulbs go off with the teachers like, oh, I don't have to find this word from our curriculum in the device and panic when it's not there or navigate 5 levels to find it. Instead, I can, you know, flip the way that I'm instructing and say the word and have the students use their device to use the more simple core vocabulary words to explain or define the vocabulary words.
Yeah, I've seen a student use descriptive teaching sort of on her own just to describe a word she didn't have in her device. So she was in a biology class. She was a head pointer and an accent, and she wasn't able to spell the word. Otherwise, we'd say like, you know, spelling is great. But so she described it kind of like how you would use the strategy by using other words that made her understand, that gave the same idea. Sarah, I don't know how long the video is, but I'm not sure if we might want to play part of that in case folks really aren't sure about that strategy.
The descriptive teaching one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I believe, let's see. I think it's around 5 or 6 minutes. Do you want me to play it, or maybe we'll come back to it if we have time at the
Yeah,
end?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay. It is linked in our slide deck though, so if anyone wants to watch it later. I just think I love the video because it's a teacher talking about it too, and it's a secondary teacher. So I feel like those are key barriers sometimes that people are like, well, that's great if you're in lower elementary class, or that's great when you're in SLP and you know how to do this, you know. So I'm like, well, here's the video of a teacher at secondary doing it. And then the other thing, the other idea on here is activity matrices. And I didn't put one in there, but maybe I can add it to our notes later. So this would be something that is basically a chart where you can write, maybe on the left side, you put out your schedule for the day. So it might be, you know, transition into the classroom, breakfast, morning circle, writing, whatever the school activities are, you put that on the left. And then on the right side, you can put information such as what core vocabulary word you'd be modeling during that time, or what strategy you're using to connect with your students. So it's just a very simple matrix or chart that helps show a team or a teacher how they could consider using AAC in their classroom. So it just really simplifies the process. And that's another really high leverage tool that I use a lot with educators because it just breaks down the task. And when I was an SLP in a building, would do this with the teacher sitting down, and even like a 5-10 minute meeting, like, hey, you know, let's write your schedule. What's one word you might want to use or model during this time? Or maybe that's not a good time. Let's look at the next block in your schedule. And that way they can refer back to it when you're not there. And let's say they didn't get to it during circle time. That's okay. There's opportunities throughout the whole day, even during transition, especially during transitions or other parts of the day. And we've already kind of thought through ways to teach AAC throughout the day.
I love that, Sarah. I didn't actually know that was the name for that. I've done that with paraeducators, and I feel like they're so good at doing that because
Mhm.
they're, they know the schedule. They want to have a plan, and that's a great tool.
Yeah, sometimes they're called communication matrix or matrices, but then I confuse that in my head with the AAC assessment tool, the communication matrix. So I refer to
Mhm.
them as activity matrices. Okay, let's move on to the next bucket. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but if we're thinking about, you know, how do we, our topic for the day, which is how do we successfully include our students who use AAC, we also might want to think about how do we make curriculum accessible for them. So the question that I have for you all is, what strategies or supports are in place to ensure that AAC users can actively participate in classroom discussions, activities, and assessments?
There's a, there's a comment in the chat that there don't seem to be a whole lot at my school. And I think you're probably not alone in that.
Mhm. Yep, that's a sad reality, I think.
Another comment, when possible, pre-teaching, using Big Macs and other mid-tech devices for on the fly. And for those who don't know what a Big Mac is, that would be like a recordable um, switch. When you press it, it records a message that you're recording with your own voice, or a student might record a peer. That's a great idea. Thanks for sharing.
I love that idea of pre-teaching. And that makes me think about graphic organizers. So maybe it's as simple as using a graphic organizer to think through with your student before the lesson. What are some words in your system? You know, if we're thinking about descriptive teaching, like we talked about a little bit ago, how can we take the curricular vocabulary word and maybe put that in the center of a bubble map? So you have that word written in the middle and then lots of lines coming out of that. And what are other words that we can use that are in your device to talk about that word or that concept that you'll be learning about?
It makes me think about that whenever possible, if we can push into classes, like someone was saying earlier, how helpful that is because you're hearing that vocabulary and you're hearing the content.
Absolutely. And also pre-teaching the teacher, you know, so if you are able, I know schedules are tight and resources are limited, but if you are able to connect with them on a regular basis and or even just in the beginning of the year and say like, hey, you're going to have a couple kids in your class who use a device to communicate. What are some strategies that will be helpful? Maybe ask them the question first and then let them compose their message while you're going to other kids and asking them other questions, and then come back to them once they have their message composed, or whatever the strategy is that might be helpful for the teacher. Doing some pre-teaching with the teachers as well.
I like that idea. I don't see anything else in the chat, Sarah.
Okay, so these are some resources. I believe several of these come from the SETC website. So just some ideas for how to make curriculum content accessible. This is an infographic that you can feel free to share to folks in your district. Some AAC curriculum resources, and then an article on using AAC technology to create inclusion in the classroom. So some things to help you and your teams think more about how to make curriculum accessible for your AAC users. And then the last bucket that we're going to talk about today is setting the AAC user up for success. So we've talked some about how do we, there's a question in the chat that says, will we be able to get a copy of the slides? Yes, those are already embedded in the notes, I believe, right, Sari? Yes.
Yeah, I'll put a link to the notes in.
Great. So we've talked a lot about, setting up the environment, training the teacher, how do we provide AAC for everyone, offer visual supports, all of these things. But let's say we have an AAC user in a classroom. How do we set them up for success in an inclusive classroom? So here are some questions for all of us to think about together. What's the best type of a backup system that your AAC user might need? That might be kind of a hypothetical question because I know it's different for all of us. How might you support quick participation in the classroom? This is just what I was talking about with pre-teaching the teachers too. So what are ways that you can, we know classrooms move really fast. So how can we talk to the teacher and offer them strategies and support for enhancing the rate of either the student or slowing down the rate of the classroom to best support our AAC user? And then what strategies can a team use to support an AAC user during their transition to a new grade level or school? Some big questions.
Yeah, 3 big questions. Anybody want to tackle one of these? And you may not know the best type of backup system, but you may have had experience with some. So if you want to share, feel free. I'm really curious about the quick participation in the classroom. There's a comment, print and use a page projector rather than laminate so it can be updated easily if needed. That's such a great idea because we do know updates happen, and that's it's also a quick and relatively inexpensive option. Another comment, I know a lot of adult AAC users have talked about having multiple AAC systems depending on the environment, not necessarily as a backup. That is true. And sometimes users who have alternative access, right? When you think about their whole day, they're not using eye gaze the whole day and they need multiple systems. But yeah, great point. And then someone mentioned same person mentioned unterrible paper is a good idea. There's a comment, the teacher's device has the vocab files for all students to model, but also as a backup if needed. Because they get to be needed sometimes.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. And especially if the device is going back and forth between home and school, there are so many times when it's going to come back to school and the battery is drained and you don't want to waste half the day charging it.
Yeah.
So having a backup on the teacher's device is a great idea.
Yeah. And another comment, automatic updates to Dropbox. Does that happen automatically?
It can depending on the app.
Okay.
I'll let you all continue putting those ideas in the chat or unmuting if you want to. Oh, it looks like one more idea came in. Portable battery packs can be great. So a student can still use their device while it's charging. I love that. And then which apps auto update? I was thinking of Proloquo. So you can select something in the settings that would make that one just automatically back up to Dropbox. Here are a couple other resources too. So going back to TIES again, they have an article on creating a student profile. And here's an example from their website. So you have just a one-page handout about your student with a photo of the student, some information about them, classes I might want to take, tips for helping me learn, please do not. So just really concrete, helpful, basic ideas for helping a student transition to a new teacher or a new school.
Yeah, I think parents like to help support those one pagers too. There's another comment. There's a tip. If you have a badly broken screen, use packing tape to make it safe to touch. Oops, I lost my. Make it safe to touch the screen to get the vocab backed up if needed. Great tip. Thanks for sharing.
That's a good idea because you don't want to give the student the broken device for fear that it could cut them. So,
Yeah.
but you might need to get that vocabulary off there if it's not automatically backed up.
Yes. And then another comment, Amazing Kids, check them out if you haven't seen her website. Feature has a feature matching tool that would have the information about which apps auto update and things like that, but it has so much about feature matching.
Hmm.
She said just to Google it. There's a small cost, but totally worth it. On Teachers Pay Teachers. Yeah.
Yeah, I second that recommendation. All of the amazing feature matching pages are really, really useful. So just a couple other resources here to check out later, supporting communication needs of AAC users who are also English language learners. It's always a hot topic. And I believe we have a future AAC collaboration corner, I think, coming up around that topic as well. And then another link here to a different article in ties preparing the AAC user for the next grade. So just a lot of resources for you to check out on how you might consider setting up your AAC user for success in the gen ed classroom. And with
Yeah.
that, we are out of time. But I did want to show at the very end of the slides, there is a link to a blog by Mike Hipple, who is this gentleman here, talking about his perspective on AAC and special education. It's just a really interesting article. So if you want to learn from an AAC user about being his different perspectives on his own experiences being included in gen ed versus being in more self-contained special ed classrooms. So it's a really interesting article.
And he's local to Washington, right, Sarah?
I think so.
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. I think he's also kind of open to chatting with AAC users. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really great information. Thanks to everyone for joining.